One night, one drink, one stranger who felt like home. The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's tavern like bullets, each drop a reminder that Sarah's life was falling apart just as violently. She stared at the amber liquid in her glass, her third whiskey of the night, wondering how she'd explain to her 8-year-old daughter Emma that they might lose their apartment by Christmas. "You look like someone stole your last dollar," a warm voice said beside her. Sarah glanced up to find a man in his mid-30s sliding onto the bar stool next to her. He wasn't what she expected in this dive bar in Queens. His clothes were simple but expensive, his dark hair slightly disheveled, in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it. But his eyes held the same exhaustion she felt in her bones. "More like my last $100, Sarah replied, surprised by her own honesty. The whiskey was making her bold. He smiled, and something about it made her stomach flutter for the first time in months. "I'm David, and I'm buying the next round." "Sarah, and I probably shouldn't." "Sometimes probably shouldn't is exactly what we need," he signaled the bartender. "2 more of whatever the lady's having, and some of those pretzels that look like they've seen better days." Despite everything, Sarah laughed. It felt foreign, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. "You're not from around here." "What gave it away?" "The fact that I'm not complaining about the Mets. The fact that you think those pretzels are edible." She gestured to the sad, stale offerings on the bar. "Real New Yorkers know to avoid anything that's been sitting out since the Clinton administration." David's laugh was genuine, reaching his eyes. "Fair point. So what brings a smart, beautiful woman to Murphy's on a Tuesday night that feels like the end of the world?" Sarah's smile faded. "Life. Bad decisions. The usual." She took a sip of her fresh drink. "What about you? You don't exactly scream regular at Murphy's." "Sometimes you need to disappear somewhere. Nobody knows your name." His voice carried a weight that made Sarah look at him more carefully. They talked until last call, sharing stories like old friends. David told her about growing up in a small town in Ohio, about his grandmother who made the world's best apple pie, about feeling lost in a city of 8 million people. Sarah found herself opening up about Emma, about the nursing program she'd had to drop out of when her ex-husband left, about the 3 jobs she juggled just to keep their heads above water. "You know what I think?" David said as they stepped into the cold December air. "I think you're the strongest person I've met in years. Strong people don't cry into their whiskey at dive bars. Strong people do whatever it takes to survive, and they keep going even when the world tells them to give up." He pulled out his phone. "Can I see you again?" Sarah hesitated. Men like David, charming, seemingly put together. They didn't stick around once they realized her life came with a kid and chaos. But something about the way he looked at her, like she was worth knowing, made her nod. "Saturday afternoon? There's this little park near my place. Emma will be there, fair warning." "I'd like to meet Emma." 3 days later, Sarah watched from a park bench as David pushed her daughter on the swings, his expensive jacket forgotten on the ground. Emma's laughter carried across the playground, and Sarah felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. Hope. "Mom, David says he knows how to make paper airplanes that can fly to the moon." Emma ran over, breathless with excitement. "That sounds scientifically impossible," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "The best things usually are," David replied, settling beside her on the bench. "Emma, want to show me those monkey bars you were telling me about?" As Emma scampered away, David turned to Sarah. "She's incredible. You've done an amazing job." "Most days I feel like I'm failing her. Most days, the best parents feel that way." Over the next month, David became part of their routine. Saturday afternoons at the park became Saturday dinners at their tiny apartment. David would arrive with groceries and cook elaborate meals, while Emma helped, and Sarah pretended not to notice how domestic it all felt. He fixed their leaky faucet, taught Emma chess, and listened to Sarah's dreams of finishing nursing school with the kind of attention that made her believe they might actually happen. "I could help," he said one evening, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch between them during a movie. "With school, I mean. I have some money saved up." Sarah stiffened. "I can't take your money. It wouldn't be charity. It would be an investment in someone I care about." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to fall into the safety he offered, but she'd learned that things too good to be true usually were. "I need to think about it." David nodded, but she caught the flash of something, disappointment, across his features. Everything changed the following Tuesday. Sarah was working her shift at the diner when her co-worker Jessica rushed over, phone in hand. "Sarah, you need to see this." Jessica's voice was strange, almost excited. The TMZ article on her screen made Sarah's blood turn to ice. "Billionaire David Wellington spotted at charity gala. Who's the mystery brunette?" The photo showed David in a tuxedo, arm around a stunning blonde in a designer gown. The date stamp was from the previous Saturday, the same Saturday he'd told Sarah he had to work late. "Isn't that your boyfriend?" Jessica asked, but her voice sounded far away. Sarah stared at the screen, pieces clicking into place. David Wellington. Wellington Industries. The David Wellington whose face graced the business section of the New York Times. The man who owned half of Manhattan was slumming it with a single mother from Queens. She made it through her shift on autopilot, then caught the subway home with shaking hands. Emma was at her neighbor Mrs. Chen's, which gave Sarah time to fall apart in private. When David knocked that evening, his usual routine of arriving with flowers and a smile, Sarah was ready. "We need to talk." Something in her tone made his face fall. "What's wrong?" "David Wellington." She watched his face go white. "Funny how you forgot to mention the billionaire part." He stepped inside, closing the door carefully. "Sarah, I can explain it. Can you explain why you've been playing house with the poor single mum? Is this some kind of experiment? See how the other half lives?" "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, David? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for 6 weeks. David ran his hands through his hair, the gesture she'd grown to love now seeming calculated. "Yes, I lied about who I am. But everything else, how I feel about you, about Emma, that's real. How do I know what's real with you? How do I know any of it matters when you go back to your penthouse and your galas and your blonde girlfriends?" "There are no girlfriends. That picture, Amanda is my business partner's daughter. It was a work event. That you lied about. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this." His voice rose. Then he caught himself glancing toward Mrs. Chen's apartment where Emma was staying. "Sarah, please, let me explain everything." But Sarah was done listening. The walls she'd built around her heart, the ones David had so carefully dismantled, slammed back into place. "I think you should leave. Sarah, please just go." He stood there for a long moment, looking like he wanted to fight, to argue, to stay. But finally he nodded and walked away. Sarah didn't see David for 2 weeks. She threw herself into work, into Emma, into anything that would keep her from thinking about the way he'd looked at her daughter, the way he'd made her believe in happy endings again. Then Emma got sick. It started as a fever, but by the 3rd day, Sarah was carrying her to the emergency room at Mount Sinai, Emma's small body burning against her chest. "Pneumonia," the doctor said, after what felt like hours of tests. "She needs to be admitted. The good news is we caught it early." Sarah nodded, trying to process the words through her exhaustion and fear. Emma would be okay, but the hospital bills. She pushed the thought away. She'd figure it out later. She was dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair when she heard familiar voices in the hallway. "I want the best pediatric team on this floor. Money is no object." "Sir, the patient isn't your... she's family." Sarah's eyes snapped open as David walked into the room, followed by a woman in a white coat who looked like she'd stepped out of a medical textbook. "What are you doing here?" Sarah's voice was rough from crying and lack of sleep. "Mrs. Chen called me. She had my number from when I fixed your faucet." David looked older, worn down. "How is she?" "She's going to be fine, and you can't just waltz in here and—" "Dr. Martinez is the best pediatric pulmonologist on the East Coast," David interrupted. "I wanted to make sure Emma gets the best care." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "I've reviewed Emma's case. Dr. Phillips has done excellent work, but I'd like to run a few additional tests, just to be thorough. With your permission, of course." Sarah looked between them, her anger warring with her love for her daughter. "I can't pay for—" "It's handled," David said quietly. "I told you, I can't take your money." This isn't about money, Sarah. This is about Emma getting well. For a moment they stared at each other across Emma's hospital bed, 6 weeks of hurt and love and confusion hanging between them. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why are you here?" "Because when someone I love is hurting, nothing else matters. Not money, not pride, not the fact that you hate me right now." The simple honesty in his voice broke something open in Sarah's chest. Dr. Martinez cleared her throat. "I'll give you two a moment to discuss Emma's care plan, but I'd like to start those tests within the hour." When they were alone, David pulled a chair next to Sarah's. "I know you don't want to hear this, but I need to say it. I lied about my name, about my money, but I never lied about caring about you, about caring about Emma. You could have told me, and you would have run, just like you're running now." Sarah wanted to argue, but they both knew he was right. "I grew up with people who wanted things from me," David continued. "Money, connections, status. When I met you, you just wanted to talk. You saw me, not my bank account, not my business. Just me. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mom? Is that David?" "Hey, sweetheart." David's voice was gentle. "How are you feeling? Tired? Are you going to stay?" David looked at Sarah, the question clear in his eyes. Sarah felt the last of her walls crumble. "Yeah, baby, he's going to stay." 6 months later, Sarah walked across the stage at Queen's Community College, her nursing degree finally in hand. In the audience, David held Emma on his shoulders while she cheered loud enough to be heard in Manhattan. "I'm proud of you," David said later, as they sat in their favorite booth at a much better restaurant than Murphy's Tavern. "We did it together." Sarah squeezed his hand. "All three of us." Emma, who had insisted on wearing her fanciest dress to celebrate, looked up from her coloring. "David, are you going to marry my mom?" David choked on his water while Sarah turned bright red. "Emma, what? Mrs. Chen says when people love each other, they get married. And you guys are always holding hands and making gross faces at each other." David recovered first, grinning. "Well, Emma, that depends. Do you think your mum would say yes?" "Probably. She's been practicing writing Sarah Wellington in her notebook." "Emma!" Sarah buried her face in her hands. David was laughing now, pulling Sarah's hands away from her face. "Is that true?" "I hate you both," Sarah mumbled, but she was smiling. "So is that a yes?" David asked, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Sarah stared at it, then at him, then at Emma, who was bouncing in her seat with excitement. "One condition," Sarah said finally. "Anything. Next time you want to disappear from your life, you take us with you." David's smile could have powered all of Queens. "Deal." Later, as they walked home through the warm spring evening, Emma skipping ahead with Sarah's engagement ring catching the streetlights, David pulled Sarah close. "You know I never thanked you." "For what?" "For being exactly who you are. For not running when things got complicated. For giving me a reason to be better than I was." Sarah stood on her tiptoes to kiss him. "Thank you for seeing me. For seeing us." "Always," David whispered against her lips. "Always." Some love stories begin with grand gestures and fairy tale meetings, but the best ones, the ones that last, they begin in dive bars on rainy nights, with two broken people who discover that sometimes the thing you need most is sitting right next to you, ordering another round and making you laugh despite everything. Sometimes home isn't a place. Sometimes it's a person who shows up when the world feels like it's ending and reminds you that new beginnings are always possible. Even at Murphy's Tavern, even on a Tuesday, even when you've given up on happy endings.